In order to sew these buttonholes, we have to sew the side nearest the fold line first. So here's our band that we made earlier, and I want to position it with the tails pointing to the left. This is the fold line down the middle, and the tails are not neatened or tucked in, they're just as they come out of the stitch. So we have to sew this edge of the buttonhole first. And remember that the pink yarn is not going to stay there, it's just a temporary holding device. You'll need a short length of sewing yarn, enough to sew about 10 stitches, and a blunt darning needle, so it's important that it's blunt. Beginning on the left side with the tails pointing to the left, follow the tail of that yarn up the side of the stitch, so we're exactly mimicking the path of the pink yarn. Bring the yarn through, but not the tails, and leave a decent length of yarn. So we have copied the side going towards the fold line, and on the second side we do the same, starting at the top of the stitch. This time we're heading towards the tail, so from the outside towards the fold line. Now, I'm not gathering this up at the moment to make it easier to see, but we're going to do the opposite to the waist yarn. We're going to go to the main colour loop we came from, and this time we're going to go down and up under two main colour stitch sides. Effectively, it's the opposite of what the waist yarn's doing. And if we have a quick look on the front, you can see that we've put a hat on top of the V. Where we sewed along parallel to the sides of the stitches, we've got a little diagonal line. And you'll see the diagonal line often hides, so you might have to lift or just move the stitch out to the side so you can check those two diagonals. So we've done our first stitch on this side. Now we go back to the main colour loop that we came out from. Go back in there, and we're going to go down and up. We're doing the opposite to the waist yarn. That's why it's reverse stocking stitch that we're technically sewing. And all the way down that vertical line, you go back to the loop you came out from on the other side, and then do the opposite to the waist yarn. The waist yarn comes up and goes down, we go down and come up, and we stay inside the waist yarn. And you can see that in fact what we're sewing has the path of a regular row of stitches. And I'm going to now just snug this up, not tight, but gently ease the slack through. You have to do this stitch by stitch, you can't just pull. And that's why once you've done this a couple of times, I would actually snug it to the right tension straight away, because it's a bit time consuming. And I'm going to keep on down and up, and it's always under two parts of the main colour. The tails get in the way, but hold your stitches securely. Down and up, over to the other side, and you'll keep on going for whatever the length of your buttonhole is. Then there'll come a point where you run out of those vertical loops. And we have reached that point. But before we go any further, let's look closely. It's actually a row of knit stitches I've sewn that join the two layers. And if we look on the public side, there should be a hat across the top of each one of the V's, the diagonal at the top. And on this side, we've got 5 hats. And on the other side, there are 4 hats because we're looking at the other side of the stitches. So it'll be one more on one side than the other. Now it's time to get across to the other side and do the other side of the buttonhole. So we do, just as before, we go back to where we came from, the main colour loop we came out of, and now we follow the side of the stitch going away from the fold line, back over to this side of the stitch, away from the fold line, and now it should be plain sailing up the outside of the buttonhole. But first, let's check it. A diagonal, 5 hats, and another diagonal on this end. Remember, those ones tend to hide underneath the waste yarn stitches. And there's the diagonal top and bottom and all the hats. So everything is exactly the way it should be. If you spot any split plies, now is the time to take it out and have another go. And from here, we go back to where we came from, under 2 stitch sides. You can see the importance of having very clearly visible waste yarns and main colours. Back to where we came from, under 2 stitch sides. And I can post that out of the way now. And keep on going until you end up coming out of the same hole where we started. So there's where we started, and we come back to that point, but we will have one more stitch left to do at this point. Let's check. Diagonal, diagonal, 5 hats, but on this side you can see we haven't completed the last stitch. So when you come out of the hole where you started, you've got one more stitch to go. And now we've been right around the hole and we're ready for the next step.